What freedom feels like to be able to just be, to go wherever, whenever, to come back when you want, or don't come back at all, to stop time and grab an instant to take a breath of worry-free air and cherish the sun's relaxing warmth as it soaks the skin. What freedom feels like. Hitch a ride on some carefree breeze, or pound the ground, kicking up all the dust you can muster. To work when you want, and play when you please. To hold on tightly to what's yours. You could share it if you want, or keep it all for yourself. What freedom feels like. To play and frolic with the group, playing by your own rules, or abide by nobody's rules at all. To have one friend and swear your loyalty forever and ever. To have hopes for yourself and dreams for what matters even more. What freedom must feel like. There were those who would never know. For enslaved people, freedom was something from another world. Sure, one could have hope, but hope was a dangerous notion to hold on to. Sometimes it was best not to have it. That way, the disappointment didn't sting so bad. Enslaved people had no legal rights. In court, they could testify if called, but could not testify against or about white people. They could not own property. After all, enslaved African Americans were themselves considered property. If attacked or beaten, they could not strike a white person under any circumstances. Enslaved people could not be away from their owner's plantation without permission. They could not gather together in groups unless a white person was present. They could not own firearms. They could not be taught to read. They could not be taught to write. Enslaved people could not marry unless they had the permission from their owner. If permission was indeed granted, an important addition was made to the traditional wedding promises. Until death do we part was changed to until death or distance do we part, acknowledging the ever-looming possibility that anyone could be sold away to another plantation at any time, no warning, never seen again. Enslaved people couldn't name their children after themselves. That would mean you actually think highly of yourself. And an enslaved person who thought highly of themselves was seen as an unbearable threat. A mother or father was unable to protect their child from a master's beating, nor could they protect each other. Looking at a white person in the eye was strictly forbidden. A steady gaze at the floor was always safest. A free black man put it this way: "No day ever dawns for the slave, nor is it looked for. For the slave, it is all night forever." By the 1770s, the drums of war were beginning to pound. The American Revolution, with its loud cries for liberty, equality, and freedom, was drawing near. Could a new day be dawning for enslaved people? African Americans, both enslaved and free, played critical roles throughout the American War for Independence. Some stories are well known, like James Armistead, the enslaved man who asked for his master's permission to serve in the Continental Army under Marquis de Lafayette. Because of Armistead's knowledge of the Virginia terrain, Lafayette decided to use Armistead not as a soldier, but as a spy. Posing as a runaway, Armistead made his way into the camp of British General Lord Cornwallis and quickly gained the trust of the British. While among the British, doing menial jobs and some work as a guide, Armistead kept a sharp eye and an open ear out for any important information that he could carry back to Lafayette and the Americans. After a short time, the British, feeling comfortable they had Armistead's loyalty, asked him to spy on the Americans. Armistead agreed, and his life as a double agent began. Whose side was he on? The answer came when Armistead overheard the British plan to send a major force to Yorktown, Virginia, to join Lord Cornwallis and put the clamps on the rebellious southern colonies. James Armistead took this important information straight to Marquis de Lafayette. It was with this information that Lafayette and General George Washington hatched a plan to use the French Navy to trap Cornwallis at Yorktown and capture a large portion of the British forces in America. The siege at Yorktown was a success, a huge factor in the 13 colonies gaining independence and becoming the United States of America. James Armistead was certain that deed to help the Americans would result in his personal freedom. He was wrong. The brand new United States government denied his request for freedom because he had not actually fought in the American Revolution. Armistead resumed his life as an enslaved man. When Lafayette heard of Armistead's sad reality, after he had risked so much and given even more for the United States, he asked the U.S. Congress to reconsider. They did, and James Armistead became a free man. He took the name James Armistead Lafayette to show his gratitude to the French general who'd returned a favor. There are other names of African-American patriots: Salem Poor, who killed a British general at the Battle of Bunker Hill; Peter Salem, who matched that feat at the same battle; Micah Hicks, Thomas Gibson, William Cough, Syphax Brown, Thomas Mason, and Ned Griffin, whose master, William Kitchen, deserted and ran away from the Continental Army, was caught and arrested. When facing the possibility of being returned to battle, William Kitchen offered up a replacement: his enslaved property, Ned. The stories behind the names of Black patriots are not too difficult to find. But the idea to allow enslaved Africans to serve in the American Revolution was hardly American. It was purely British. In 1775, 4 months after George Washington declared a ban on African Americans, free or enslaved, in the Continental Army, Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia, issued a proclamation. It stated that any person enslaved in the colony of Virginia would only need to find the British Army camp to find freedom, if they were owned by a master sympathetic to the Patriot cause, and if they agreed to fight with the British Army. Despite the amount of ifs in Lord Dunmore's proclamation, this was the chance of a lifetime for thousands. Virginia planters, including Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, woke up one morning to the realization that some of their enslaved workers had vanished. Answering Dunmore's call to arms and freedom, thousands of Virginia's enslaved women, children, and men found their way to the safety of the British lines. An enslaved man named Titus Cornelius fled his New Jersey Quaker owner and clawed his way to a British Army camp in Virginia. There he found himself a new life, a new title, and a new name. Titus became Ty, and soon after that became Colonel Ty, commander of the Royal Ethiopian Regiment. This small, mobile military unit struck terror in the hearts of patriots as they carried out stealthy raids throughout the New Jersey colony. Using swamplands as highways, Ty and his men targeted former slave masters, plundered their homes, burned their plantations, and freed enslaved people at every turn. They captured some Patriot leaders while assassinating others. Colonel Ty's Royal Ethiopians grew to 800 and never lost a man, all while wearing uniforms embroidered with the words, "Liberty to slaves." By the winter of 1777 and 1778, Washington's army had been battered and demoralized. Disease, defeat, desertion had reduced the Continental Army to a mere 18,000 men. Only then was Washington ready to place guns in the hands of free and enslaved African Americans, allowing them to fight in the Continental Army. Like the British before them, the Americans offered freedom to those who joined. The British refused to be outdone. Months later, in 1779, Britain issued another proclamation, the Philipsburg Proclamation. It granted freedom to any enslaved person who made it to British lines. And this time, there were no ifs. Whether your master was a patriot or loyalist, whether you agreed to pick up a gun or not, whether you were from Virginia or any other colony, find the British, you find freedom by war's end. To seal the deal, the Redcoats just had to defeat those pesky rebels and their new French allies. After all the quill pens cooled off from the barrage of promises, proclamations, and declarations, 5,000 African Americans joined the Continental Army. And just how many had joined the Redcoats? Over 30,000. No matter the side they chose, American or British, rebel or redcoat, in more cases than a few, the side these brazen, bold, and brave people were on was their own. Who wouldn't want the fruits of freedom offered by the chaos of war? And they were so close, they could just about taste it. By 1783, the war was so unpopular in England, and worse than that, it was expensive. And even if the American patriots were often fleeing the field of battle, what they weren't doing was giving up. So the British did, confident this American experiment in people ruling would fail. I mean, who did these United States think they were anyway? The Iroquois Confederacy? During America's war for independence, as many as 100,000 enslaved African Americans escaped their owners. George Washington led efforts to recapture all that lost property, with hopes to return them to slavery and get back to business as usual. As British ships readied to leave their now former colonies, New York Harbor was choked with over 10,000 African Americans. The scene was a packed madhouse, as formerly enslaved people were desperate to escape the terrible fate that surely awaited them if they didn't get out of the United States. Parents were desperate enough to part with children, hoping that if nothing else, they could find that life of freedom. Only 3,000 to 5,000 African Americans actually sailed from New York on what is now called Evacuation Day. An even more chaotic scene unfolded in the South. Thousands of African Americans crowded aboard British ships in Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. Letters written by American Southerners who witnessed the evacuation wrote of African Americans swimming out to catch British ships as they sailed from southern ports. Some climbed the side of the ships. The British took on as many as they could, but were soon unable to take on any more of the African American refugees. Ships filled beyond capacity, British sailors used swords to fend off escaping African Americans, frantically trying to catch a ride to freedom. Countless were turned back into the hands of the Americans. It is not clear how many people were captured. It is clear that some made it. While it is apparent that the loyalties of colonists split during the American Revolution, some remained loyal to the British Crown, while others formed loyal bonds with patriots. For thousands of enslaved African Americans, allegiance was something more than basic loyalty to a nation or to a belief. Their loyalty was to themselves, their families, and to a feeling, the feeling of freedom. The story of Seymour Burr makes it plain. Seymour Burr was an enslaved man owned by the brother of the famous politician and lawyer Aaron Burr. Determined to fight with the British and find freedom that way, Seymour escaped his master. But he was captured and soon returned. Seymour Burr then somehow convinced his master to let him go and fight with the American patriots and earn his freedom that way. And that he did. Who won the War of Independence? Seymour, and thousands of others just like him.